The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Practical Vedanta Part 3, Segment 1. In the Chandogya Upanishad, we read that a sage called Narad came to another called Sant Kumara and asked him various questions. One of which was, if religion was the cause of things as they are, and Sant Kumara leads him, as it were, step by step, telling him that there is something higher than this earth and something higher than that, and so on, until he comes to Aksh, Ether. Ether is higher than light because in the Ether are the sun and the moon, lightning and the stars. In Ether we live and in Ether we die. Then the question arises, if there is anything higher than that, and Santa Kumara tells him of prana. This prana, according to the Vedanta, is the principle of life. It is like ether, an omnipresent principle. And all motion, either in the body or anywhere else, is the work of this prana. It is greater than Aksha, and through it everything lives. Prana is in the mother, in the father, in the sister, in the teacher. Prana is in the knower. I will read another passage where Shvetaketu tells his father, rather asks his father about the truth. And the father teaches him different things and concludes by saying, that which is the fine cause in all these things, of it are all these things made. That is the all. That is truth. Thou art that, O Shvetaketu. And then he gives various examples. As a bee, O Shvetaketu, gathers honey from different flowers, and as the different honeys do not know that they are from various trees and from various flowers, so all of us, having come to that existence, know not that when we have done so. Now that which is that subtle essence, in it all that exists has itself. It is a true. It is a self, and thou, O Shvetaketu, art that. He gives another example of rivers running down to the ocean. As the rivers, when they are in the ocean, do not know that they have been various rivers, even so, when we come out of that existence, we do not know that we are that. O Shvetaketu, thou art that. So on he goes with his teachings. Now, there are two principles. The one is that we know by referring the particular to the general, and the general to the universal. And the second is that anything of which the explanation is sought to be explained so far as possible from its own nature. Taking up the first principle, we see that all our knowledge really consists of classifications, going higher and higher. When something happens singly, we are, as it were, dissatisfied. When it can be shown that the same thing happens again and again, we are satisfied and we call it law. When we find that one apple falls, we are dissatisfied. But when we find all the apples fall, we call it the law of gravitation and are satisfied. The fact is that from the particular we deduce the general. When we want to study religion, we should apply this scientific process. The same principle also holds good here. And as a fact, we find that has been the method all through. In reading these books from which I have been translating to you, the earliest idea that I can trace in this principle of going from that particular to the general, we see how the bright ones become merged into one principle. And likewise in the ideas of the cosmos, we find the ancient thinkers going higher and higher. From the fine elements they go to the finer and more embracing elements. And from these particles they come to one omnipresent ether. And from that even they go to an all-embracing force of prana. And through all this runs the principle that one is not separate from the others. It is the very other that exists in the higher form of prana or the higher form of prana concretes, so to say, and becomes other. And that other becomes still grosser and so on. The generalization of the personal God is another case to point. We have seen how this generalization was reached and was called the sum total of all consciousness. But a difficulty arises. It is an incomplete generalization. We take up only one side of the facts of nature, the fact of consciousness, and upon that we generalize. But the other side is left out. So, in the first place, it is a defective generalization. There is another insufficiency, and that relates to the second principle. Everything should be explained from its own nature. There may have been people who thought that every apple that fell to the ground was dragged down by a ghost. But the explanation is that the law of gravitation, and although we know it not as a perfect explanation, yet it is much better than the other, because it is derived from the nature of the thing itself. While the other posits an extraneous cause, so throughout the whole range of our knowledge, the explanation which is based upon the nature of the thing itself is a scientific explanation, and an explanation which brings in an outside agent is unscientific. So the explanation of personal God as the creator of the universe has to stand that test. If that God is outside of nature, having nothing to do with nature, and this nature is the outcome of the command of that God, and produced from nothing, it is a very unscientific theory. And this has been the weak point of every theistic religion throughout the ages. These two defects we find in what is generally called the theory of monotheism, the theory of a personal God, with all the qualities of a human being multiplied very much, who by his will created this universe out of nothing and yet is separate from it. This leads us into two difficulties. As we have seen, it is not sufficient generalization, and secondly, it is not an explanation of nature from nature. It holds that the effect is not the cause, that the cause is entirely separate from the effect. Yet, all human knowledge shows that the effect is but the cause in another form. To this idea, the discoveries of modern science are tending every day, and the latest theory has been accepted on all sides, and that is the theory of evolution, the principle of which is that the effect is but the cause in another form, a readjustment of the cause, and the cause takes the form of the effect. The theory of creation out of nothing would be laughed at by modern scientists. Now, can religion stand these tests? If there be any religious theories which can stand these two tests, they will be acceptable to the modern mind, to the thinking mind. Any other theory which we ask the modern man to believe on the authority of priests or churches or books, he is unable to accept. And the result is a hideous mass of unbelief. Even in those in whom there is an external display of belief, in their hearts there is a tremendous amount of unbelief. The rest shrink away from religion, as it were, give it up, regarding it as priestcraft only. Religion has been reduced to a sort of national form. It is one of our very best social remnants. Let it remain. But the real necessity which the grandfather of the modern man felt for, it is gone. He is no longer satisfied to his reason. The idea of such a personal God and such a creation, the idea which is generally known as monotheism in every religion, cannot hold its own any longer. In India, it could not hold its own because of the Buddhists, and that very point when they gained their victory in ancient times. They showed that if we allow this nature is possessed of infinite power and that nature can work out all its wants, it is simply unnecessary to insist that there is something besides nature. Even the soul is unnecessary. The discussion about substance and qualities is very old, and you will find sometimes that old superstition lives even at the present day. Most of you have read now during the Middle Ages, and I'm sorry to say even much later, that this was one of the subjects of discussion, whether qualities adhered to substance, whether length, breadth, and thickness adhered to the substance which we call dead matter, whether the substance remaining, the qualities are there or not. To this, our Buddhist says, you have no ground for maintaining the existence of such a substance. The qualities are all that exist. You do not see beyond them. This is just the position of most of our modern agnostics. For it is this fight of the substance and qualities that on a higher plane takes the form of the fight between noumenon and phenomenon. There is the phenomenon world, the universe of consistent, continuous change, and there is something behind which does not change. And this duality of existence, noumenon and phenomenon, some hold is true, while others with better reason claim that you have no right to admit the two, for what we see, feel and think is only the phenomenon. You have no right to assert there is anything beyond phenomena, and there is no answer to this. The only answer we get is from monotheistic theory of the Vedanta. It is true that only one exists and that one is either phenomenon or noumenon. It is not true that there are two, something changing and in and through that something which does not change. But it is the one and the same thing which appears as changing and which is in reality unchangeable. We have come to think of the body and mind and soul as many, but really there is only one. And that one is appearing in all these various forms. Take the well-known illustration of the monoists, the rope appearing as a snake. Some people in the dark or through some other cause mistake the rope for a snake. But when knowledge comes, the snake vanishes and it is found to be a rope. By this illustration we see that when the snake exists in the mind, the rope has vanished. And when the rope exists, the snake has gone. When we see phenomenon and the phenomenon are only around us, the noumenon has vanished. But when we see the noumenon, the unchangeable, it naturally follows that the phenomenon has vanished. Now, we understand better the position of both the realist and the idealist. The realist sees the phenomenon only, and the idealist looks to the noumenon. For the idealist, the real genuine idealist who has truly arrived at the power of perception, whereby he can get away from all the ideas of change, for him the changeful universe has vanished. And he has the right to say to all delusion, there is no change. The realist at the same time looks at the changeful. For him, the unchangeable has vanished, and he has a right to say, this is all real.